Hi green lovers, it's the end of February and it is well past the time that I should have planted my tomato seeds. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the varieties that I've chosen to grow this year. I've chosen some old varieties like these that have done very well for me in the past, and I've chosen some new ones as well, like this one, the Phil's One tomato, which I am really excited to grow. Just look at that thing. So I thought I'd do 23 varieties for 2023. It sounded catchy, but I couldn't fit within that budget of number of seeds, so I've ended up planting about, I'd say 30 or 31 varieties. But let's just roll with it. I'm going to tell you what I've chosen, why I've chosen them, and why I'm excited to grow them this year. So first, let's get one thing out of the way. Am I really late in planting tomato seeds this year? Well, I live in Northern California, Zone 9B, and my last frost date is around the end of March, and this is the end of February. So I've got about 4 weeks left before my last frost date, and tomato seeds should typically be planted about 6 to 8 weeks. So technically, yes, I'm late, but hear me out. There are some factors that make me not at all concerned about being late. Number one, I live in California, which has an extremely long growing season. In fact, I'm harvesting tomatoes all the way through, October, sometimes even November. In fact, I even harvested a couple of tomatoes in my greenhouse during the month of December, my unheated greenhouse. So I'm not terribly concerned about being 2 or 3 weeks late to planting my seeds. Number two, we have been having an unusually cold and lengthy winter this year. So the groundhog predicted 6 more weeks of winter. Well, that's coming true where I am. In fact, if you guys have been following along, California has had an incredible amount of rain this year, and I'd say incredible. Grateful for it. We're a drought-ridden state and we love the rain, but this year it's been excessive, more than I've ever experienced. Plus, we've been getting snowfall, guys, believe it or not. It's been snowing in California. So some of the hills near where I live have had snow caps. People have been skiing and snowboarding on those hilltops. So yes, winter has been excessively cold, and I would rather wait a couple of weeks more just to give the weather a little bit of time to settle down. And thirdly, the reason I'm not concerned is because this year I actually have a greenhouse. If you folks have been following my channel, you know about my new Costco Yardistry greenhouse, which means that I am growing indoors in my grow tent, which, by the way, increases the germination speed substantially, that warm, humid environment that I can provide to them. And then I can start quickly moving them out once they germinate into my greenhouse. And that way, I just keep the cycle going. I save the time that I need to harden them off, etc. And yes, for all these reasons, I'm not concerned about being late by 2, 3, even 4 weeks. Now, if you happen to live in a place where your summers get really, really hot and humid and your tomatoes just tend to be disease prone, then yes, 2, 3, 4 weeks does matter to your growing season, because your growing season is basically late spring, early summer, and then after that it becomes too hot to grow tomatoes. But where I am, I'm blessed. I can grow tomatoes pretty much almost all year long, except those couple of weeks of winter. So let's get to it. What varieties am I growing this year? Okay, so flipping my camera down over to my seed collection here, I've got basically 4 types of tomatoes that I'm growing. The first type is the cherry tomato. The second type is the paste tomato that I use to make sauces, etc. The third type are the slicing, or just call them the eating tomatoes, the tomatoes you want to eat raw. And then the fourth special category is not exactly a tomato, it's a tomatillo. And I'm growing that as well as something called poha, or ground cherries. So that is not exactly a tomato, but in the same family, so I'm going to include that as well. Okay, so let's start with cherry tomatoes. Now, I'll start with my absolute favorite cherry tomato, which is the black cherry. Now, black tomatoes in general grow really nicely and have wonderful flavor in my garden, and the black cherry tomato is definitely no exception. It is a very productive tomato, and it is so sweet, so delicious. And I'm not alone in ranking this as my favorite. I've seen polls that have been done on Facebook, etc., and a lot of gardeners tend to choose black cherry as their favorite tomato. So if you haven't grown black cherry before, I highly suggest you try it. You're in for a special treat. Along the lines of black tomatoes or dark colored tomatoes is a new one that I'm trying this year. This one is called blueberries. So I can't say very much about it other than the fact that I've seen good things said about it. I actually got this for free. A generous gardener on Facebook sent this to me. So I'm going to try this one this year. Moving on to two old favorites of mine that have a place in my garden every single year, and that is the Sweet 100 tomato and the Sun Gold tomato. These are both hybrid tomatoes, so you cannot really save seeds for this, but gosh, they are so good, so delicious, disease resistant, and yeah, I would grow them every year in my garden, and they're again a favorite of most gardeners. I like black tomatoes, but I also like yellow tomatoes. And the reason I like the yellow tomatoes or the whitish tomatoes is because they actually are not as tomatoey, they're more fruity. Now, I like the tomato flavor, but the fruit flavor has something very special about it, and the yellow plum definitely doesn't disappoint when it comes to that delicious fruity flavor. The next two are a product of Wild Boar Farms. The owner of Wild Boar Farms is Brad Gates, and they specialize in creating tomato varieties that look absolutely stunning, as in these examples, Brad's Atomic Grape and Barry's Crazy Cherry, and they also taste phenomenal. So I know that there's all kinds of schools of thought on whether or not Brad's Atomic Grape is a delicious tomato. I love it. And I think the main thing about this is that you have to be incredibly patient. You cannot eat this until it's completely ripe. If you try eating it before that, it just does not taste good at all. It's one of those things. You either eat it ripe or you don't eat it at all. But the thing about Brad's is also the look. This thing, it's got this shimmery sheen on its skin, and it comes almost in this like rainbow of colors, and it goes through all these shades of color throughout its life cycle. And now it takes very long for it to go from the initial green stage to this beautiful sort of reddish brownish stage, which is when you want to eat it. But before that, it goes through all kinds of other colors, as you can see in the picture over here. So just for the sheer eye candy value of this, I highly recommend that you try growing it at least once. Now, the other one that I grew before, and I didn't grow it last year, but I do want to grow it again, is Barry's Crazy Cherry. Look at that. Crazy, crazy cluster of cherries, right? And it's also a tasty little tomato. Again, a yellow tomato, so it's a little bit on the fruity side. But yeah, just incredibly huge clusters of cherry tomatoes. It's practically unreal. Now, this next category of tomatoes is what's called micro tomatoes. I'm growing two micro tomatoes, the Orange Hat tomato and the Tiny Tim tomato. The Tiny Tim tomato I've grown before. I have not really loved it. It's a little bit on the sour side, but the Orange Hat tomato I really like. If you let it ripen completely, it's super sweet. Now, these plants grow only about 6 inches tall, and so I grow these in my green stalk vertical planter. I'll put a link to the video where I'm harvesting the Orange Hat tomatoes, but the plants are just delightful looking, as you can see. Yeah, that picture, that's exactly what the plant looks like. It is so cute. So Orange Hat tomatoes and Tiny Tim tomatoes are also going to be in my garden this year. And this last category of small tomatoes or cherry tomatoes, they're not exactly cherry tomatoes, and they're almost in a category by themselves. So the story about dwarf tomatoes is there's this gentleman, his name is Craig LaHoulier from North Carolina, the United States, and he partnered with a lady named Petrina Nusk Small from New South Wales in Australia, and they started to develop several different dwarf tomatoes, crossing dwarf tomatoes with heirloom tomatoes, and they created this huge variety of tomatoes that didn't grow very tall, so about maybe 4 feet tall, so you could actually grow them very easily in the container. But the special thing about them is that they are heirloom, you can save seeds from them, and they are indeterminate, and they grow full-size tomatoes. So small plant with large tomatoes was really the goal behind it. And this became a huge community-driven project over 15 years. And there are a huge number of varieties of dwarf tomatoes now that are being stabilized, that have already been stabilized, and that are available for purchase. So I've got these two that I've grown before. I do want to get more dwarf varieties next year, but for this year, I'm going to continue to grow the Geranium Kiss and the Ferdoco Phi. I'll put a link to the video where I actually talk a lot more about these two tomatoes and I show you my plants, etc. So I'll put a link to that at the end of this video and in the description below. Just really quickly, folks, by full disclosure, I wanted to share with you, I do have some tomato plants already growing. Now, this is an experiment that I am doing where I'm trying to see whether I can actually succession plant tomatoes given my long growing season. So these tomatoes that I got growing here were started in the mid-December timeframe, and they are all determinate tomatoes, mostly San Marzanos and then a few other varieties. And I'm going to try and see whether I can get 2 batches of these going this year so that I can make sauce twice in the year rather than make it all in one shot, which is a really, really long project for me. So I love canning tomatoes. I made a video on how I do it. I'll put a link to that as well. But it's really easy. It's a lot of fun. And I really enjoy the taste of fresh canned tomatoes from my garden. Speaking of paste tomatoes, I'm growing 2 varieties mainly this year. The San Marzano, which is a favorite of a lot of gardeners. This is your quintessential spaghetti sauce tomato, and I've got a video where I showed you last year and the year before how a tiny little plant grew like hundreds of tomatoes. So I'm growing San Marzanos. I grew 4 last year. This year I'm going to be growing 8 or 9, so I'm doubling up on my ambition here. The other paste tomato that I really enjoy growing is the Amish paste. Now this is a very large paste tomato, and I believe it's an indeterminate variety, and so it produces throughout the growing season, but I really enjoyed it last year as well, so I'm going to be growing this again this year. I hope you're enjoying the video so far, folks, and if you would be so kind as to hit that like button and maybe even subscribe to my channel if you appreciate my videos, I would sure appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so now moving on to the largest category of tomatoes. This is the eating fresh kind of tomatoes. So I've got in this very large tomatoes, medium-sized tomatoes, smallish tomatoes, but basically these are the ones that I eat fresh, slices that I put into my sandwiches, chop up and throw in my salads, etc. And it's very important that they taste fantastic and that they're not too watery and they've got a good meaty texture. Now, Costaludo Genovese is one of those that I grow every year, grows very well where I live. So it's going to be in my garden again this year. The Phil's one. Now this is my single seed challenge. Again, I'll put a link in the description to the single seed challenge. But basically, it's where you take a seed and you kind of keep track of it throughout its life cycle. You plant only one of its kind, and so you give it that special attention and just helps you appreciate deeply the process of growing a plant from a seed all the way through its life cycle. So I'll put a link to the single seed challenge. It was started by Scott Head from Black Gumbo Southern Gardening. And Phil's one, gosh, look at that. It looks like an extraterrestrial tomato, doesn't it? Well, I think I'm going to be having a lot of fun growing this one this year. And it's a yellow tomato too, so I'm expecting it to be fruity. This one is Ananas Noir. Now, ananas means pineapple in many languages, and this tomato is supposed to have that pineapple-y flavor. It didn't grow so well for me last year, so I'm going to try it again this year. I got this highly recommended by a very trusted neighbor, and so I'm going to try growing it and see whether I can have better luck this year. I've got a good beef steak over here. I don't know what it is, but hey, it says beef steak, and I want a good slice of tomato, so I'm going to grow this. I hope the rain outside is not too distracting. It's been raining continuously, and I've been waiting for it to stop so I can do some recording, but it doesn't seem like it's going to let up, so hopefully it's not messing with the audio. Mr. Stripey is another very large tomato, very pretty tomato. It's got those delicate yellow stripes on it. And again, it's one of those that you can actually get in the big box store where I live and grows really well. Now I've got a few tomatoes that are not heirloom tomatoes. So these are all hybrids and they're from Johnny Seeds. And the reason I'm going with hybrids this year is because, again, last year was kind of a weird year for tomatoes. I had a lot of disease, and I usually don't have much of a problem with diseases because I've got such a hot, dry climate. But last year was just a really weird year. So this year I decided not to take any chances, that I would go for some disease-resistant varieties. And these ones have been grown specifically to be disease-resistant. So I've got Lemon Boy, a lemon tomato, so fruity. I've got New Girl, I've got Celebrity Plus, and I've got Grand Marshal. So let's see how these do. I've never grown these before. Got a couple more pineapple and fruity flavored tomatoes. This one over here is a pineapple tomato, and this one here is a great white. Now this is one of the fruitiest tomatoes I've ever had. It's got like almost like a cantaloupe-like flavor. I don't know, it's kind of really bizarre, but it's so tasty. It didn't produce very many fruit for me last year, but all the fruit that it produced was so delicious. So I'm gonna try and see whether I can get it to grow better this year. And then I've also got a couple of small sized tomatoes. Now I like growing the smaller tomatoes, the ones that grow about maybe no more than about 8 ounces or so. The reason why I like growing the smaller tomatoes instead of the really large ones is because they ripen a whole lot faster than those large ones. Now I have a problem with rodents in my garden. I've got squirrels, and last year I had an unbelievable problem with mice and rats. And later on in the season, they just sort of multiplied and they were just coming out and eating all my tomatoes. So I want to be able to harvest the tomatoes before the squirrels and the rodents get to them, and so these are good choices because they ripen sooner, and earlier in the season it feels like the pest pressures are a little bit less. Now I do have a few black tomatoes that I am going to be growing. I'm going to be growing black crim and chocolate stripes and black brandywine. Now all these I've grown before and they grow so well. I don't know what it is about the black tomatoes. It's that kind of umami tomatoey flavor that I really love, and they look so pretty too, especially where the sun shines on them. They tend to take on darker hues, and yeah, just really pretty tomatoes and delicious as well. And last but by no means least, my tomatillo, pineapple tomatillo. Never grown this before. I tried last year, and again, the rats and the voles got my plants. So fingers crossed, going to try again this year. Pineapple, so that's got to be good. Pineapple seems like a theme this year for me. And then I've got this that I saved from a ground cherry that a neighbor gave me a few years ago, and I've been growing it every year. So ground cherries are one of those things that you either like it or you don't. I don't like it. My husband loves them, so I grow them mainly for him. But here's the interesting thing is I actually had so many ground cherries, this was a couple of years ago, and I dehydrated them and they tasted unbelievably delicious, even for me, even though I hated them raw. So yeah, try growing ground cherries. The reason they're called ground cherries is because when they ripen, they fall to the ground and then you pick them up. And they are all in the tomatillo family, so they've got this little kind of husky thing around them. So interesting little tomatoes. That's why they don't get dirty when they fall to the ground, is because they've got that case around them. So I hope you enjoyed the video, folks, and I hope you're as excited as I am to grow tomatoes this year as I am every single year. Until next time, live green and love your greens. And don't forget to hit that like button.